Good afternoon, Senate Institutions. It's Tuesday, April 9th, 2024. We're gonna have some wide-ranging discussions as far as section 10. And we have a room full of folks. As we customarily do, I'd like to just introduce the committee at the start of the week, and we have one senator that's missing, but we'll start over here.
Irene Hunter, Chittenden North, including Fairfax.
Brian Collmore, representing the Rutland District.
Senator Russ Ingles, Essex District, and we have over here.
Linda Lehman, Committee Assistant.
Thank you. Before we start, I just want to take a minute and talk about, we have a missing senator who has been a very big part of this building for 42 plus years. And he is to have to be living under a rock, not to understand that Senator Mazza has resigned and take care of his health and to take care of his family and have his family take care of him. And I can tell you that he was a very big inspiration to me. Somebody came in as a freshman senator. I don't want to take what the governor has said as far as taking somebody, putting under his wing, but I can tell you in the modern area of politics, that's exactly what he did with me. We were together both in transportation and institutions, and very, very big influence on me. If you wanted to not talk a lot and just listen and learn, you could learn a lot. And I'm gonna sorely miss him, as I'm sure everybody else is. Anybody else want to say a word?
No, same thing. I mean, we used to take walks at lunch, just walking around the building. If you just shut up and listen, you could really learn a lot about the process and about the history and the legacy of the institution. So yeah, we can't replace it. There's no.
Oh, I got here too late.
Yeah.
I'm a newbie, so
I
we
understand
didn't
that.
intersect enough.
That is good.
My loss.
Well, thank you for that. And we'd like to start off today with Commissioner of Department of Fish and Wildlife, Commissioner Herrick, and welcome. Welcome to Senate Institution. Glad to have you today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the record, and for Herrick, and the Commissioner for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And if I might, I hail from Senator Mazza's district. So I've been lucky enough to have him as my senator and friend for the last many years. And we're sorely miss him. He comes up to the islands all the time. And he's a good soul.
Thank you for that. So, Commissioner, we're going down through the Capitol bill, trying to figure out, the nuances of what the House has done, and we're seeing that you're missing about $250,000 out of your budget, and I guess that's a lot of money, and would just like you to tell us what we're going to be missing if we can't restore that money or restore some of that money, and how is that going to impact what you need to get done in Fish and Wildlife, and also with what the governor recommended.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. It is a sizable cut to our capital bill or capital fund. And there's a range of areas where it could impact. And they range from work at Dead Creek. There's a maintenance garage that we've had. We started the process just before I came in, and then with COVID and everything, the bids kind of languished, the prices went up, so we've come back, and we'd like to get that done. But it also, we're looking at impacts to the camps, both at Buck and Kehoe. So for
What was the
instance,
second one?
Kehoe.
Yeah.
That's right. So, for instance, several items in the hot kitchen are in need of replacement, as they came to the kitchen from the old dining hall at Buck Lake, or just reached their life expectancy. These items include proofer, cooler, cake plates, replacements, wallpaper, etc. But then some of the other areas at both camps, we have large trees near the picnic area that need to be removed within the next 5 years due to hazards. That's the last thing we need. They require professional tree company. Oh, there's a list of all the stuff at the camps. The flooring is from 2008 and it's a lot of traffic. And despite, shampooing regularly, it's getting pretty ragged. Imagine, you're running kids through on a regular basis. I mean, I don't think it's,
Can you tell us a little bit, I know that maybe some of the committee knows and maybe some of the newer ones don't, or some people might be watching from, afar.
Sure.
Tell us what these camps do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Green Mountain Conservation Group, and a lot of kids come to these camps and they learn a lot about ecology. They spend a great deal of time outdoors and learning. A lot of folks come out of these camps, I think almost all of them with their hunting license. But they're learning a lot about all the work that we do at the department, aside from fishing and hunting. Habitat restoration, the importance of good ecology, protecting our water resources, so on and so forth. And what I can tell you is a large percentage of the people that work at the department now went through those camps, including our current wildlife director, John Austin. And if you haven't met him, you should. He's an amazing guy. He's well published in the world of environmental science. And I'm lucky and proud to have him working, but he went through the camp. A number of our wardens go through the camp. And so it inspires the youth in the state to see how beautiful and the amazing resources we have. And more importantly, find careers here, which we need more of. The governor talks about this on a regular basis. We don't want our kids growing up and then going away and not coming back. And so we have many cases and instances where these young kids grow up and they say, I want to work for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. A lot of them go to UPM and they feed right.
So the camps are run primarily through the summer months, when the kids were out of school. It's a 6-week camp for both of them.
Yeah, I don't remember the total number of weeks, but it's pretty comprehensive. A lot of kids come back a number of times and then they become junior counselors and they become counselors. There's a progression. And it's, I didn't go, I wish I had. I'm jealous when I look at what they do. And it's a fantastic experience.
I drove into Buck Lake, last year, all the way down to the camps, and, that's quite a long ways on a dead end road. And it goes all the way to the end, so once they get out there, they must have a pretty good experience. I mean, there's no cars driving by.
That's right.
They're out there and, probably have their sole attention for a little bit.
That's right. And they spend a lot of time outdoors.
Yeah.
Which, and I'm pretty sure, I don't remember exactly, I don't think there's a lot of Wi-Fi out there.
No.
And yet that's one of my favorite things is seeing kids with a fishing pole in their hand instead of an iPhone.
Yeah.
So this $250,000, is it mainly coming from those camps, or is it basically taken and you gotta figure out where you can plug it in?
So that's usually how it works, and, but there's a whole list of things, but none of them are good choices.
Yeah.
We don't ask for money that we don't actually need. But like I said, the camps are one of the areas. Some of the money's already, had been encumbered. And so we're looking at the 25 budget, and these are what's left out there.
Can you, at the end of the testimony today, maybe get us a copy of that, of what you have for a list? Or at least get us, what you're gonna have to cut, or just something for us a little bit more as we go down through.
I will send that to the assistant.
Okay.
And also, what lines are we talking about, Commissioner?
I think it's line 72. Is that
Okay.
correct?
That could be, yep.
Is that right, Nick?
Yeah. That's great.
So Nick, after you identify yourself, I have a question for you, apologize.
Nick Kramer, Department of Finance Manager.
So they moved some money around, Nick, as far as, the governor recommends, is 1.344150. And it shows, 1.9 in that budget, but we combined a few different accounts on that. Is that correct?
That's right, Mr. Chair. So if the committee directs their attention to the very last page of the spreadsheet for all the cash fund appropriations were listed. I believe there was an $800,000 appropriation for this one, that's just on line 198. So in the governor's recommend, we had $800,000 in cash. The House has removed that entirely. And then increased above on line 72, the bonded dollar appropriation by a certain amount. But the reduction of the cash netted against the increase in the capital bonded section is a net decrease of $244,000.
How much?
I think it's about $244,000.
That's what I thought it was, yeah. This is moved. Move to line 72. So I'm gonna write my little note here.
So the 800,000 is still 800,000 in the other, in the 72 line.
800,000 has been eliminated completely for that, but then in line 72, they increased it by 500,000.
Oh, so net loss of 300,000.
But, or.
244. 550, 850.
Yeah, I can pull up the exact. Second.
So, so they took out the cash and then moved more money than the bonded dollars, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Committee, is that clear as far as what went on there? As far as,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a haircut of $244,000. In fairness to the commissioner, he was notified, he wasn't aware he's gonna testify until this morning, and he's gonna give us more documentation as far as what's gonna be problematic to him. That will, yes, Nick.
If I might, Mr. Chair, just to add one piece of color to this, I think this was one of the cuts made in the later stages of the House development of their construct. And I think there was one piece of information that may have been, there might have been some miscommunication based on the title of one of, so Commissioner Herrick's team goes through a process every year in terms of prioritizing capital projects. There's multiple tiers of review, tier 1, tier 2, all the way down to I don't even know how many tiers. But there was, because there was a large group of miscellaneous projects that were just there were too many of them to fit on a single line in the spreadsheet. They received the title on the spreadsheet that his team sent to the House Institutions Committee. It just said tier 2. And I think there might have been a misunderstanding on their part that meant they were somehow lower priority. I think afterwards there was an attempt to clarify, no, that's not like, it's not tier 1 versus tier 2. There's many, many tiers. This is more of a time space saving measure on the spreadsheet. So just in case that comes up, in case this committee gets into that level of granularity, I think that's important to share. There's maybe a little bit of a PR snack.
Okay, I've done a couple of those, it seems, so we can understand that. So, Commissioner, anything else you want to add as far as,
So I will put the information you've requested in a memo form that should look.
we would appreciate that. And, committee, anything else for the commissioner as far as, those dollar amounts, that are missing off of the governor's recommend?
I guess I would just be curious to know what that tier 2 item is that if we need to plug it back in.
So I can explain that.
Okay.
So internally, I asked folks when they were building their requests internally
Yeah.
to prioritize them as if 1, 2, or 3, and the 2 got left in, and so it looked like it was a secondary request, but it made the cut. And so that was which we explained, but I'm not sure it made it through the notice.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm available if you need me to come back in and explain anything else. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yep, what you're gonna provide is gonna be helpful, committee, it's probably something I think we had talked before, we're gonna try to accommodate, so make sure that you guys are, very resolute in what's going on here and what's happened, so, I think as the budget is kind of getting, maybe out by, Friday or into Monday, we're gonna, tomorrow, we're gonna start putting some numbers to paper. As far as how we're gonna move some monies around, so, I just need to make sure that, why we get these folks in here, like we've done, is make sure that we're very well aware of what we're trying to accomplish and defend why we wanna do that, so, okay, well, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Appreciate you very much, and, now we're, Secretary Moore, are you ready?
I am,
Sounds good, welcome.
thank you. I will join this Zoom. Cause I do have some slides to share that I can then send to the committee afterwards. I apologize for providing it in advance. And I am joined by Gianna Petito from the Clean Water Initiative Program. You may have previously met Gianna's colleague Emily Bird, who has joined me previously. Emily had a baby about a month ago, and so is out on maternity leave currently, but Gianna's here to help answer questions you may have about the Clean Water Initiative pieces as we go through the.
Well, this committee likes clean water, so.
Perfect, me too. And then I know Nina Gage is here from the Agency of Agriculture because the clean water budget encompasses work done at ANR, also work done at the Ag Agency, as well as work done at VHCB. And so it's a little bit of a unique in that section of the capital bill, I think. And so Nina can help speak to some of the changes that were made to the clean water budget that specifically affect the agriculture agency.
And I think we're gonna cut right to kind of the chase on that a little bit, Secretary. The House inadvertently, for whatever reason, decided that they were gonna cut $550 from the clean water, which matched quite a bit. We'll let you tell us how much it matched, but in their hindsight, they're believing that maybe that was a little bit premature. And this committee has discussed that as well. And I would say that again, when I don't say it lightly, I think one of the proudest things that we have in this committee is what we've done for clean water, especially when it's match money. So I think we're gonna find a way to put that back in the budget, seeing how both sides are agreeing on that. But we certainly would love to hear when it's appropriate, when I don't want to steal your thunder. But when it's appropriate, we're definitely gonna wanna be hearing what that does, so we can defend our decisions.
Sure.
So,
Thank you very much for having me today. For the record, Julie Moore, I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources. I'm gonna give just a little bit of a high level overview around clean water and the importance of this work, talk about how we're funding it, how the Clean Water Board funding process worked, and then get into the specific FY25 capital bill.
thank you.
So as I'm sure I've shared with you in previous visits with the committee, Vermont's waterways really do vary in quality. We have any number of exceptional waters that require protection, but also some waters that are suffering from excess pollution and require restoration. And that these two components really make up the overall work of clean water being led by ANR. The types of concerns we're seeing in Vermont aren't unique to our state. Nutrient problems exist in freshwater lakes across the country. And in fact, the most recent EPA lakes assessment found that 20% of the nation's lakes had high levels of either phosphorus or nitrogen. We expect an updated version of that National Lakes Assessment to be released by EPA later this year. Vermont has had a really robust response. We are taking good, important, and meaningful steps, and included among them, if not chief among them, is the fact that we have dedicated resources to this work. And that includes both capital bill dollars as well as funds that come out of the rooms and meals tax, the property transfer tax, and the unclaimed bottle deposits. So just in terms of Vermont's TMDLs, these are our water quality restoration plans. We have about 29 of them in place for various things, and they run the gamut from very small water bodies like Sunnyside Brook in Colchester, all the way up to Lakes Memphremagog and Champlain. So they are as big or as small as conditions demand. And Act 64 passed by the Vermont legislature in 2015, along with some of obligations and commitments we've made to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, really provide a framework for all of our work around clean water. So this is a question I get asked regularly, which is part of the reason just to touch on it again in terms of what's driving surface water pollution in Vermont. Certainly sewer overflows get a lot of attention, agricultural runoff gets a lot of attention, some people point to construction. But the fact of the matter is what underlies that all is weather. We have more rain, it means there's more pollution reaching our water bodies. And I think it's also important to know that weather is noisy. It doesn't rain the same way 2 years in a row, and so it can be really hard to detect trends. But if you pull back and look at 80 years worth of data, you can start to see some things here. You can see that the annual average precipitation in Vermont is increasing about 8 inches over the last 80 years. And the number of high intensity events, which we've defined as receiving more than an inch of rain in a 24-hour period, has also increased similarly during that time period.
Julie, can you just go back one? The ones that are below the line, is that drought? What is?
Yeah, so the blue lines are the trends. Like if you run a set of statistics on this data set, the gray dots represent annual years. So what you're seeing is like 2001, or maybe it was 2002, was a very dry year. We saw, just a little more than 20 inches of rain versus 2011 you can pick off as probably the highest point there, Tropical Storm Irene, and we saw more than 50 inches of rain. We also saw more than 50 inches of rain in the last calendar year.
And then, do you include snow here? And
It does, it converts that into
Converts that.
water, equivalent number of inches
Okay.
of rainfall.
and so that's for quantity, and then quality is represented differently.
It is, so then this is just saying, depending on rain, because when we get to this next graph, so the green line on here is looking at phosphorus pollution. How much phosphorus is coming down our rivers each year into Lake Champlain? The blue line underneath it shows how much water is coming down our rivers.
So the quantity.
Correct, and so what you can start to see is even though sort of the signal is muted in the discharge numbers, in years where there's more water coming out of our rivers, there is more phosphorus going into Lake Champlain.
Does that represent, Secretary, that there's more phosphorus being used, or just more water collecting more phosphorus as far as from the lands that it probably never had reached before? So there's gonna be a abundance of phosphorus that was never getting touched before because we're having a higher water level reaching higher up. So
Yeah,
that's where the most of the phosphorus is coming from.
it's a little bit of each of those, but what we're describing, what is most surface water pollution in Vermont is called non-point source pollution. So it occurs when rainfall or snowmelt washes across the landscape and picks up phosphorus. And that can be leaves or other naturally occurring materials. It can be manure, fertilizers applied to farm fields. It can be pet waste or bird droppings, or grass clippings that get blown out into the street. So it has a lot of different sources, but in a really dry year, that material tends to stay where it was placed. In a wet year, it tends to get moved around more. And we also, another component of what we're seeing in terms of the phosphorus load going to Lake Champlain is riverbank erosion. So on years where we have more high flow events and more riverbank erosion as a result, it gets reflected in a higher load.
Are you seeing more phosphorus on the east side
Of the
of the state? Yes.
So on the east side of the state, we are paying closer attention to nitrogen than we
Right,
are
no, I
to
know.
phosphorus.
I understand that that's the one that we're officially looking at, but I've just noticed more farm waste getting into rivers,
I don't
so.
know, Gianna, if we have data on phosphorus concentrations in the Connecticut River watershed that we're tracking. Not that I'm aware of, I have to follow up.
Okay, just curious,
Yeah, we can look into that for you.
because it's likely to,
Sure.
to be, I mean, these aren't
Right,
coincidental, you know, there's.
Correct. Yeah, that we're, Vermonters generally are living on the landscape the same way,
Yeah.
regardless of if they're in the Champlain Basin or the Connecticut River Basin. And frankly, a lot of what we've seen, if you look at, sort of long-term trends going into the lake, it's most of the trends are relatively flat. Which is some signal that our work is working. Obviously, we want to turn that corner and start seeing decreasing trends in phosphorus pollution. I don't know that we're there yet in most of our major rivers, but we are seeing stability that probably didn't exist historically.
Alright, so just a follow-up, so stability in the face of increasing activity, is that what you're saying?
At least in the face of increasing precipitation.
Okay, just the precipitation, okay.
And why would we be looking more on nitrogen on the east side and not on the west side? Can you just talk about that for a minute?
Sure, so and when the ultimate receiving water is a freshwater body, so on the case of the western side of Vermont or the northern tier there, it's either going into Lake Memphremagog or Lake Champlain.
Yep.
Phosphorus tends to be what we consider the limiting nutrient, meaning it's how much phosphorus is in the water that determines how severe an algae bloom is gonna be. When your ultimate receiving water is a saltwater body, and in the case of the Connecticut River, the ultimate receiving water is the Long Island Sound. Nitrogen tends to be what limits uncontrolled algae growth.
Makes sense.
Just to,
Yeah, I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
So just to put a plug in for our farmers, and I think the Secretary is correct, we've seen at least a decrease in the amount of phosphorus load, I hope. Whether it's turned the corner or not, I don't know, but things like no-till, cover crops, all that sort of things that the farmers are willing to do and want to do, I think has made a huge difference in the amount of phosphorus load into the lake. I don't know,
Right.
you know,
So we're winning that battle some, or?
Yeah, the progress is slow, I don't know if that's, oh, it is my next slide. The progress is
Yeah.
slow,
Yeah.
but there's progress, and this comes out of our annual Clean Water Performance Report. Gianna and Nina can speak to a lot more detail in all the data that underpins this. But what we do each year is compile, or aggregate all of the best management practices farmers are deploying, best management practices towns and V-Trans are deploying, stormwater management practices, wastewater improvements. And that's what's represented in that dark blue bar, the collective impact of those things. If you sort of stretch out our trend over time, that orange line suggests where we think we'll be come 2036, which is the endpoint for our current commitments to EPA. The green line shows where we need to be. And so we're on track, but we're going to need to pick up the pace a little bit, which has been expected. A lot of the programs here, our regulatory programs, they took a while to stand up after Act 64 was passed, and they take a full permit cycle of 5 years in order to achieve full implementation. But this gap is something we're concerned about, we're tracking, and this note is just to show EPA is tracking this too, right? They've expressed some concern about the fact that this graph and those projections show that we need to accelerate our rate of progress. And that they flagged that continued funding support is, they know, is critical to our ability to achieve these reductions.
On that back slide, one back, please. What's the blue towers? What's that represent?
So those are the estimated phosphorus reductions achieved. The greatest reductions have been achieved in the agricultural sector to date. Many of those are annual practices, things like cover cropping and conservation tillage. And so the reason those hashed bars exist starting in 2023 is some of those practices, if the farmer doesn't continue to implement them each year, they're not going to continue to yield those phosphorus reduction benefits. The things shown in the hash bars are infrastructure investments. We've made things like stormwater management on roads or even improved manure storage on farms that have multiple years of benefit. So it's a combination of annual project practices and capital projects that will ultimately achieve our team goal.
So on the towers, on the blue towers, the higher the tower, the better that you like to see that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And it's savings, it's kind of counterintuitive looking at savings as a.
Right, we're trying to.
But you need to,
Yes,
And so-
exactly right. We're trying to accumulate 212 metric tons of phosphorus reductions. And so far, we estimate we've achieved just over 40.
And so there's probably a target for the state of New York, right, on the other side.
There is, yep. Yeah, they don't have the same kind of, I think, framework we've established for measuring progress, in part because EPA in 2015, 2016 reviewed only the Vermont portion of the TMDL. But come 2026, they have indicated they intend to review the New York portion as well.
And why are there, and so, explain again why the feds are a little bit concerned in the letter, on the next letter?
Because we're on this orange line, and you
Yeah.
can see the green line sort of has.
So they
a
want
knee-
us on
a
the
knee
green
of the
line.
curve. Yep, and we anticipated there would be a knee of the curve right about this year in which we sit. And what they're saying is, we need to see evidence that that you continue to hit your targets as we moved into this accelerated phosphorus reductions.
And the monitoring it before it hits the lake, so that we know it's coming from Vermont and not New York.
So these are largely modeled estimates of phosphorus loads. We do collect water quality samples at the mouths of the major tributaries, so not all of them, but the major tributaries. There are flow gauge stations that are maintained by the US Geologic Survey. And then in addition, we have a set of points throughout the lake that between New York, Vermont, and Quebec, we monitor the same points several times a week, all summer long, and are able to build a shared data set for in-lake water quality in addition to what's coming down the rivers.
So even though New York isn't gonna get judged again by the federal government until 2026, are we doing as well as them in your estimations or better?
So I think we are. Vermont is 60% of the watershed, is that right? Ballparky? Yeah, we're about 60% of the watershed. So we have a higher bar, we have a bigger obligation than New York does, but we are keeping pace. There's an organization called the Lake Champlain Basin Program, which is called considered a geographic area program under EPA, but they convene representatives from New York, Vermont, and Quebec to make sure we're all working in lockstep with one another. And in fact, we have a meeting next week to continue those efforts.
So you hear about the blooms a lot. And you know, we see the beaches get closed in Burlington and this and that. I don't want to pick on that. It's not what I'm here to do. But our water quality of Lake Champlain versus what it was 20 years ago, noticeable difference? I mean, or it's just still a battle. I mean, if we didn't do anything, it'd be terrible and we're.
Yeah, there's a bit of that, right? There's a but for all of the investments we've made, all of the good work of farmers and municipalities and individual Vermonters, things could be a whole lot worse. It's not particularly satisfying when you go down to the waterfront and see a blue-green algae in summer, right? So it's a tough story. And part of the messaging of the Clean Water Initiative Performance Report each year is to provide that insight to the magnitude of the work taking place on the landscape and hopefully give folks the little bit of a boost they need to keep going, because this is really big and complicated work. And so we knew it was a long-term commitment. We're a third of the way through our long-term commitment, and staying with it through 2036 is really important.
And who do we compare with as far as that water quality? Are we comparing against the Great Lakes? I mean, the larger body of waters, obviously, it's gonna be something sizable. But is that where we're getting compared to?
So it's a little hard to make some of those comparisons. One of the statistics I heard at one point is if you looked at the drainage area for Lake Erie, it's the same, it's proportional to just the Winooski River Basin of Vermont. So we have a whole lot of land draining into, while it's an enormous lake, it's
Right.
smaller than the Great Lakes, right?
Right.
And so as a result, we have to do a lot more work on the landscape to have an impact on inland water quality. So there's lessons learned and certainly information sharing that we do with partners in the Great Lakes. We want to benefit from research and different approaches they piloted, and similarly, hope they're looking to some of our good work as well. But each water body is unique and
Right.
requires a unique strategy.
Okay.
So just in terms of funding for clean water, and this is a nice segue into the capital bill, just to remind you that the capital bill is a really important component of our overall clean water funding. We sort of keep it distinct and separate from the Clean Water Fund, which is that combination of property transfer tax, rooms and meals tax, and the unclaimed bottle deposits, but taken together, along with some, work that's done through the T-bill, as well as a handful of other appropriation sources. We really have been at this $50 to $60 million a year, for the last 3 to 4 years. And so this chart presents all of the different sources of funding that kind of roll up into the clean water budget. The blue bars are the Clean Water Fund in 2016, 17, and 18. That blue bar is exclusively the property transfer tax surcharge. And then as we move into 2020 through current days, it includes the rooms and meals tax and unclaimed bottle deposits. The orange bars would probably be of the greatest interest to this committee, and that those are capital bill dollars. And as you may recall, in 2019, the treasurer had put forward what she called bridge funding, while we worked to put in place the rooms and meals tax and unclaimed bottle deposits. And so there were some significant unspent capital bill dollars that were made available to clean water work that year. But then we worked back towards that $10 to $12 million annual commitment in out years. And the other piece that's in there, maybe two pieces I should flag. As this committee may recall, the capital bill appropriation for clean water for FY25 was reduced last year to put more money into municipal pollution control grants, which is why the orange bar is a little bit shorter in that 25 budget. And we've also had the benefit of the 3 preceding fiscal years of $10 million a year roughly of ARPA funds being available to support clean water work.
Do you have it projected farther on? Somewhere?
Just through 26, actually Nick builds for us what we call our clean water operating statement. So it takes advantage of the best current fiscal projections for rooms and meals tax and property transfer tax. And then I think Nick has created a methodology around the unclaimed bottle deposits, because the e-board doesn't actually offer us a forecast on that. So the further out you get, the more squishy those numbers become, but we try to look at least a year ahead.
Totally.
That's what that 26 projection reflects, is the best information from the e-board translated by Nick into our budget with an assumption, I think, of $12 million in the capital bill.
Right, so that would be the funding available, but then you put that with the other graph earlier showing where we need to go. So there's a gap there. And then just a question, don't we have fewer farms in terms of acreage than we used to?
And just small farms are becoming bigger farms.
So there's consolidation, but doesn't necessarily mean there's.
So is there less or more acreage?
About the same.
Or about the
Some of them
same.
are being developed into housing, but I don't know.
Like, it just seems odd to me that the phosphorus would be going up. Or maybe it's not going up, maybe I'm not understanding it.
No, it's
The-
stable.
Well, here we go.
Like, if we don't have more.
That green bar represents the phosphorus load. So the part of the challenge here is it's really noisy, right? Because it's so weather dependent.
Yeah.
It's hard to get that clear sense. Even though season conditions are changing on the ground, what's actually changing in lake water quality. And Nina may be able to help answer the question about acres in agriculture.
According to the most recent.
Just identify yourself, yeah, just for the.
Sincere apologies,
No.
for the record, my name is Nina Gage, I'm the Assistant Director for the Division of Water Quality at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
Thank you.
According to the most recent census data, there is a slight decline in farmland in Vermont. But to show you in comparison, there's actually an increase in milk production, right? So that's where we see some farms growing in size. And you also see this flux of land use between forest land, farmland, developed land, and that's a lot more complex to track.
So you have more manure going on less land, and a little bit, probably in some areas, if you're losing farmland and you've got the same amount and milk production is going up. Efficiencies in milk production will account for some of that, but if you're doing farming and you're producing more milk, it's fair to say probably you have as many cows. And they do provide waste, and it's easy to see how your phosphorus levels would be battling to stay the same when you're putting more manure on less land.
We work very extensively with farms of all sizes to ensure adequate nutrient management planning, which is sort of that balance of manure and land base. And it really depends on the farm, how that works out, but we are seeing consolidation, so larger farms getting bigger or slightly bigger. We're also seeing some small farms disappear, right? We're seeing this decline in dairy farms, especially small dairy farms.
Do you check the cost of managing manure?
Yes.
Okay, well, we can talk later, cause I'm just, as that cost goes up, there's going to be other alternatives. And so I'm just curious about when that threshold is met, because the phosphorus is a result, and so that's a cost to the state, right?
But flesh that out a little bit further than what you just said.
Well,
So, we're-
just looking long term, right? If we have more and more manure, we're gonna have more and more phosphorus, unless we find a way to have less phosphorus in manure, which is gonna be.
I don't think there is more manure.
Well, if there's more milk, isn't there more manure?
No,
No.
there's more efficient at milking the cows or whatever, you know, there's mechanization.
BMP is about storing manure in places, bunkers and stuff that didn't necessarily they weren't necessarily the case years ago.
Right.
Again, Senator Renner and I are on Senate Ag,
Yeah,
so we kind of defend the agricultural sector, but I think they're doing a great job. I think the secretary would agree. Can we do more? Absolutely. Municipalities can do more too. It isn't just the farmers that are introducing phosphorus into the lake. So, you're
Oh,
thinking
yeah,
about it.
no, and I'm not assuming that, but
Okay.
I'm just trying to look long term and,
Well, what are the
thinking about-
solutions or options? I didn't understand what you meant by that.
well,
Right.
take it somewhere else and pay for it, like, I mean, like landfilling, where it's. I mean, you don't wanna do that now, 'cause it's much too expensive.
Well, I think the other piece that shouldn't go unrecognized is those nutrients have real value to farmers and potentially to
Yes.
other users. And pre-COVID, I worked in partnership with Secretary Tebbetts and the then Secretary of Commerce, Mike Sherling, and we launched something called the Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge, or VPIC, and have looked at different opportunities to capture some of that phosphorus in manure and use it for other beneficial uses. And there are a couple of those projects still in operation, including a composting facility, I think in Fairfield, Fairfax,
Franklin County.
Franklin County, thank you. One of those F towns in Franklin County, where they've created, they've got a screw press system and are taking some of the solids out of the manure and then actually selling it to local gardeners.
Okay.
And the idea being that this should offset importation of peat moss and topsoil and other things and hopefully help sort of get us closer to a phosphorus balance. Because Vermont's challenge is in part we buy a lot of grain and feed from outside Vermont. Those, and so all that phosphorus in those commodities ends up being landified here and trying to get to something a little bit closer to a balance. But phosphorus is finite. The supplies of phosphorus are finite, and so looking for alternative strategies to beneficially reuse that material is an important piece. But landfilling it, I'm not sure is the right option,
No.
just because it does have such value.
Oh, totally, no, and I wasn't, I mean, that would be an example if it got to be a real problem, but,
Right,
but
but the
definitely like harvesting it, which is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Is much better.
it is, and the nutrient management
Reuse.
planning that Nina was talking about, where you're trying to find that balance between how much manure is applied and what crops need to be successful is an important tool there too, to make sure we're putting the right amount of nutrients in the right place.
Go back to your comment about taking that and putting it into residential use. You're almost losing control a little bit of that phosphorus, because now you're counting on, as you had said, Senator, of communities, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. So you're not, as they're taking that other compound of manure and turning it into home use. I mean, you still have those, you have the storm drainage systems and running into the streets and lawn maintenance and all of that stuff. So you do have that concern.
Well, as the secretary said, it'd be nice to be able to say, this is how much rain we're gonna get every year from now to the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Because that would take a very volatile piece of this out.
Sure.
And you could really plan on what you could do, but we know that isn't gonna happen probably. So, I think Vermont overall is doing a great job with this. Because I'm not sure that farmers in the neighboring state across the lake are as enthusiastically embracing the same techniques that the Vermont farmers are. And I think all you gotta do is look across the lake and see runoff there that's just immediately going into the lake. So with all due respect to you folks in New York, you can do a better job by looking across.
All right, that's helpful, thanks.
So just a little bit more as we move into the clean water space. Capital funds have been used to support our clean water work in Vermont since at least 2003. Historically, that's included a range of different types of practices, ag best management practices, so things like manure pits, treatment of stormwater runoff, making investments and improvements at municipal wastewater facilities, as well as some natural resources restoration projects that include wetlands restoration, floodplain and river corridor protection, and some work in our forests.
So stormwater, right? Well, the next one might be really interesting.
Well, you can't really read it, so I'm
Well,
gonna just
the,
talk through here.
I'm just very, as a municipal official, former municipal official, and a person who's dealt with stormwater utilities, I think they're a really good financing mechanism for municipalities to manage, to have the funds to manage stormwater, especially from folks who aren't taxable. So, is the department supportive of that?
We are, and we have been historically, and I don't know if it's on here or not, it is this line right here. We actually offer incentive payments of $25,000 a year for the first 4 years, 5 years? One of
I
those,
think we determined this year was
4 years. So a total of $100,000 to municipalities that establish a stormwater utility.
Good. Yeah, I would, and not right now, but just at some point, I would really like to know about that.
Yeah, and so the last one that we're paying into right now is the town of St. Albans.
Okay.
But there've been, I think, a half a dozen or so that have been formed over time. So obviously this chart is wicked small. This is the overall clean water budget, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the column that I've circled in red, which is the capital bill appropriations for fiscal 25. And then a little bit about how we are working to make the clean water budget whole for that reduced amount of capital bill dollars in the current fiscal year budget. But before I jump there, I just want to give a nod to Gianna and the team of the Clean Water Initiative program. as well as our strong partners in the Ag Agency, B-Trans, and ACCD, among others, that allow us to compile this really incredible report. Gianna's here today as sort of a supporting expert, but would encourage that you may want to hear from her and her team at some point, where they can really get you into details in terms of what this looks like on the ground. They're able to break it apart by watershed at this point, break it apart by agriculture versus stormwater versus wastewater, sort of any way you could envision to slice and dice the data on where these investments are going. That team has compiled this excellent report. So our clean water work is funded by a combination of state, federal, local, and private monies. And as I noted previously, it's to the tune of $50 to $60 million a year right now, all in. Shoot, I didn't change that. It should say 25 at the top of that slide.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
The total appropriations plan for this year is about almost $42 million. Of that, about 26 million is clean water fund money. We are also using $4 million of one-time money, and this is sort of excess receipts, as I'm sure this building is very aware of. The property transfer tax in particular has burned really hot for the last several years. And so we actually accumulated some funding on the bottom line of the Clean Water Fund, and we're using that this year. We have $6 million in capital bill appropriations, and then we are anticipating $6 million of Lake Champlain Basin Program funding that Senator Leahy has secured this year as well. That's 100% federal money, so no state match required.
I
And
want to point out to the committee, I'm sorry, I apologize.
no,
Secretary. That $4 million, originally it was gonna be $10 million that we ended up taking $4 million from them to do the municipal grants last year. And that was the deal struck with ANR that they would do a one-time, but they wouldn't be able to do any more after that. But they could help the cause of what they did last year. So that historically isn't something that would happen. That was the deal that they made last year. So that's where that $4 million came from.
and I got a little bit more detail on it. So just maybe before I jump, just reminding folks, the Clean Water Board provides advice to the governor that ultimately comes to the legislature as well around the best allocation for Clean Water Fund money, including base and one-time money, as well as capital bill dollars. But that basin program appropriation sits outside of the Clean Water Board process.
So then the 4 million and the 25 million, what budgets are those? Is that the
That's
just regular
a
budget?
bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just in terms of what I'm hoping you'll take away from this conversation is you just indicated, Senator Ingles, FY 25 clean water capital bill appropriation is $6 million, and that's down from 10 million in FY 24. It covers 4 different lines that are in your capital bill, the water quality grants to farmers and partners that Nina or Nicole could talk about. The SRF match, which I also want to talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute. Municipal pollution control grants, and then an allocation to continuing to improve forest access roads. Sort of holding our state forests and state forest highways to the same standards we're holding municipalities to. In addition, we've got that roughly $4 million in bottom line money that we're using. There's less than $350,000 remaining on our bottom line at this point. So just to be clear that this is really a one-trick pony, and we are playing that trick this year. So we don't have the ability to go back to it. We have used those dollars specifically to round out funding for water quality grants to farmers and partners, as well as about $2 million worth of funding that goes into the HCB for water quality projects this year.
Where's your comfort level on that fund, Secretary? Usually, as far as we're taking $4 million out of that, you got $350,000 left. Where's that comfort level usually set?
It's sort of twofold. One, we have a separate reserve, right? So managing that one-time money to be roughly zero makes sense. That said, that $350,000 number 6 months ago, our projection was it would be over $800,000. So as the economy started to cool, that
Right.
cushion has started to shrink.
So it was a good thing we made that deal last year, not this year.
Yes, agreed. So in the better news account, I did want to talk also about the state revolving fund match. So as you may recall, the capital bill in section 9 includes the drinking water state revolving fund match, and in section 10 includes the clean water state revolving fund match. Just big picture, this is our best tool for meeting some of the more than $2 billion in estimated water infrastructure needs in Vermont over the next 10 years. We've also had this incredible opportunity under the Inflation or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act or bipartisan infrastructure law to make even more accelerated investments in water and wastewater projects, which is fantastic because we are also seeing unprecedented demand for this funding. This current year, there were just over $265 million in applications, and we have about $105 million in available funding. So $2.50 worth of request for every dollar available. This also represents a 60% increase over what we saw last year in terms of applications.
Why is that? Aging infrastructure?
Aging infrastructure, and frankly, some of the terms and conditions under the IIJA are very favorable. So we're seeing people get into line because they know that this is sort of a generational funding opportunity.
Projects they could never do before, never even thought of that they could do it. They've been pushed to say, hey, maybe we can make that work now.
Correct. A number of the different types of projects eligible for funding under the IIJA come with a 49% subsidy. So 49% of your loan would be forgiven if you meet certain eligibility criteria or are doing certain types of work. And that's a pretty powerful incentive for people to apply now.
More of the rural communities probably doing that, or is it just hard to break that down by in a conversation?
It's hard to break that down. Certainly on the drinking water side, yes. On the wastewater side, our wastewater facilities tend to be in our larger communities.
Are we apt to see any new wastewater facilities that haven't already been built, other than upgrades or all that? I mean, are we built out pretty much as far as where we could be as a state?
We're not, but at the same time, the capital investment required on the front end for these facilities can make it really challenging. Under ARPA, we have what we refer to as the Village Water and Wastewater Initiative, where we've been working with communities on soil-based shared disposal systems. We have a couple that are moving forward. Sort of our best case poster child is Montgomery. That is moving forward with a project, and really it only penciled out financially for that community because of the ARPA dollars that we were able to bear. I think absent those ARPA dollars, it would be really hard for a community to have affordable user rates building into system.
And maybe you don't know this, but when Montgomery puts a system in, what is their potential to add to that as far as capacity? Is it a certain amount of numbers that they would have to, I mean, they're just not building for what they're doing right now. There must be a thought process going in there saying, okay, if we expand this much in the next 20 years, we can assume that capacity.
There are some modest growth assumptions, but they also have to be able to afford it in the near term. I'm happy to get you some additional information on that, but it's not as overbuilt. And I use that not in a pejorative sense, right? But as it might be, Rutland, for example, I think has almost twice as much dry weather capacity as they actually treat. Right now, Montgomery's not building a system twice as big as.
Okay, you don't have to, you have more to do than to do that. It's just a conversation. This thing is out loud. Used to be a community that I represented, and in a sense, I still do at times because it's in close proximity, but yeah, just curious.
Sure.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, Madam Secretary, the funding situation. We talk an awful lot about the match, so whether it's 4-to-1 or 10-to-1, which we had at some point last year.
Yeah.
But the one you just mentioned, sort of that 49 or 50% forgivable subsidy, if you will. Is that a normal way for, the federal government to do it, or is it more likely that if you spend this, you could match this kind of thing?
So these subsidies are larger than what we normally see. We do have the ability to provide some amount of subsidy for projects, and there's guidance provided in statute for how we calculate that. It depends on the type of the project and sort of the financial position of the community. In these instances, for example, EPA is really pushing communities to evaluate whether they have lead service lines in their drinking water systems. And so they're willing to effectively pay a premium through that additional subsidy to encourage and promote that work. Get done.
Rutland still has some wood.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, yeah, those lead surveys are going really well, right here. So, just on the increase in applications. So how you were getting to this, I think, what proportion of those are for, rehabilitation of
Almost all,
existing?
almost all of this work is
Okay.
for existing systems. I don't wanna swear there are no new systems in there, particularly on the drinking water side. Actually, I know there's a new system in there on the drinking water side
Okay.
in Killington, but
All right.
the vast majority of them is repairs, refurbishment, and reinvestment in existing drinking water.
Okay. Because as you know, and as you all know, the way that we're looking at housing increasing is there's a lot of incentives for housing in places with water and wastewater, sometimes water or wastewater. So we could estimate how much is going to be in existing water and wastewater, but then there are folks who want more facilities, especially water.
Yeah.
So does the department have an idea of where those would make sense, or how many of those would make sense, or is there a very long-term plan for that?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can look into that. And we each year put out a request under what we call our intended use plan for people
Yes.
to bring their projects to us. And then there's this village water and wastewater initiative where we've sort of gone to communities that have previously indicated to us interest in a community drinking water or wastewater system and said, we have this unique funding opportunity if you feel like you're ready to move, especially right now. But I don't know if there's a longer term plan beyond that, but I can check and let you know.
Or even just know how much funding could be available for new systems.
Sure.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. So just in the capital bill that's in front of you, if you added line 68 and line 83 together, you'd find that there's about $2.8 million committed currently in the capital bill to match our base SRF awards. So this is the money we get year in and year out, even when the IIJA doesn't exist. Each year EPA releases final SRF numbers, and recently our final SRF numbers have unfortunately been shrinking. Some of that's masked by the fact that we have all of this IIJA money, but it's because congressionally directed spending comes off the top before we get our SRF awards. And
Oh,
so
that's SRF, it's,
state revolving funds. And so this year, the total match required for those two, across those two lines, and I can get you the specific split between drinking water and wastewater. We were notified is reduced by $1.99 million. So that's a $1.99 million that's in the capital bill right now that's no longer required in order for us to fully draw down those federal dollars. At the same time, the version of the big bill that passed the House takes $5 million of the reserve that was created in a waterfall last year to allow us to access the final $73 million in these IIJA funds and uses it for current year uses. So I am here today to pitch to you all the idea to take that $1.99 million in FY25 capital bill and recommit it back into the IIJA match.
so you're still $3 million upside down. though.
We are, but it would be $2 million less upside down than we are at the moment.
How much is that leveraging as far as revolving loan fund dollars?
So these dollars are 4 to 1 always. So the 14.6 million pulls down just over 73 million from IIJA, so the 5 million we've lost. Would pull down 20 million of federal funds, or this 2 million would pull down 10. Or 8, excuse me, so it is enormously helpful. I'm concerned that that state match is gonna be harder and harder to find in out years. And the IIJA in some ways was unique at the federal level in that Congress fully appropriated the bill on day one. So these dollars exist. And it's just, we need the match to pull them down. It's not as if we're waiting to understand how Congress will act in the next fiscal year budget. That money is already committed. And it's really just up to us to find a match.
The $3 million shortfall, you were just talking about just barely. How long do you have to show, are we in troubles of losing dollars from the federal government by not having that in that sub-account B?
We'll have one more bite at that apple in fiscal 26. I believe that last tranche of funding will open to us in August of 25. So we'll have one more chance, but I guess from my vantage, it's a high risk proposition to borrow away from that reserve. And this is one way to restore at least some of what was taken.
Hey, committee, just want to make sure you totally understand this. I know you do, but I want to make sure, and I'm gonna talk it out loud while everybody's in the room. So as we heard, we lost $5 million on sub-account B that leveraged match dollars. Okay, so we're aware of that. So what Secretary is telling us is that now she's got basically another $2 million to go back into that fund. So now she's down $3 million in that fund reserve. The reason I'm bringing that up is that as we are negotiating back and forth on this capital bill, people are gonna say, well, why do we need to do anything? They just got $2 million. I want you to totally understand, they didn't get $2 million. They got $2 million that, so there's still $3 million in the hole. So, I don't want that to be used against, us in negotiations, or even A&R in negotiations. Are still $3 million away from matching 4 to $1 that they're gonna have to make up by 2026. Everybody clear on that? I know you were anyways. I just want to talk it out loud, and then if you guys got any questions, now's the time to ask about that.
I think that was my final slide. So, and I can flip back just up to here for a moment. And this is where Nina or Nicole, I assume, will come and speak, but it's really around line 81 under that clean water capital bill appropriation. So line 81 is a little bit more complicated, and we're using 2 flavors of money to pay for that work. But there was $550,000 in the capital bill recommendation from the Clean Water Board that was reduced to 0 in the House Institutions Committee. And so maybe with that, I can turn it over to one or both of you. Nina's on it. All right. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. The record again, Nina Gage, Vermont Agency of Agriculture Fish Markets, Assistant Director, Midway Water Quality.
That kind of rolls off the tongue.
I know,
I had to practice that part of that. I'm gonna share my screen briefly. We don't need to go through all the slides that I prepared. Luckily, Julie covered the intros, which were really the background on the Clean Water Board and budget process.
Sorry, I got a 2:30 commitment.
Oh. Thank you, Secretary.
That's all my stuff way back.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
We had a few of our folks available as well, other questions come up.
For the record, Nicole DeVue, Chief Operating Officer for the Agency of Agriculture and Food Markets.
And I believe our Director of Finance and the Director of Water Quality are online. They might have meetings that start at 2:30, as I have more of the committee does as well, so.
No problem. Sure.
Try and keep it short.
No problem. Sure, you know exactly what you're doing.
So just to kind of recap the discussion and some of the questions that came up previously, we do have some information that EBM Protection helps us compile on dairy information. I'm happy to follow up with the committee afterwards. It shows you a variety of trends. Folks are very familiar with this, I imagine. So we have reducing trends in cow numbers, that's the same. We also have reducing farmland and lots of other complex stuff. So we'll include that in the committee, right?
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna just speak really briefly about our programs that we offer through our vision. And then I'm gonna talk specifically about the Best Management Practice Program, or BMP program. And this is what we use capital funding fund on farms. Couple project examples and then some connections around the importance of these dollars at this point in time, essentially. So we administer a variety of technical and financial assistance programs. Some of those help support farms to implement agronomic practices. Julie alluded to those being a very significant contributor to the state's estimated reductions in phosphorus. So in the upper screen, you can see some photos on the top line, practices like cover cropping, right? Keeping soil covered. If you're driving this time of year, I encourage you to look at the farm fields and see if there's green things in them. In last year's cornfields, those are cover crops. That is an additional crop farmers are paying to plant just to protect soil and water quality. We support infrastructure through our BMP program. That's what I'm going to talk about in a moment, just a little bit further. We support riparian buffer projects, so taking land actually out of agricultural production and implementing buffers along waterways to filter runoff. We support equipment acquisition. So sometimes it's not just about how much land do I have and how many cows do I have, but it's about what are the management options that I have available to me to apply manure safely and responsibly. We also support programs that seed down critical source areas. We have programs that support farms with pasture management, right? What are the specific considerations of the animal group you're grazing? What do those animals need to eat? How can we have animals on that land in a way that's going to reduce environmental impacts? We also have some programs that help match federal programs. The Conservation Stewardship Program. We have a performance-based programming that focuses really in depth on nutrient management planning, and then we have programs that support local and regional partners. So this is working with folks who live and work in your local communities, like conservation districts. You get extension personnel who are also able to assist farm operators who need additional assistance. Julie touched on this piece, so I'll skip right through that. So thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to the committee today. The House Committee made some changes to the capital and specifically line 81, which is section 10, clean water, was reduced to a $0 appropriation for state fiscal 25. So typically speaking, on average, this program receives about a $5 million appropriation. Based on our current year budget, the constraints of the clean water budget this fiscal year and the state revenue impacts, we're already based on our governor's recommended and the Clean Water Board recommended looking at a 66% cut in funding for this program. With the additional cut by the House, it's a 77% cut in our budget for this program.
That's the 550 that was cut.
That is the 550,000.
Yes. Thank you.
So what does this program do? Like I said, it's one of many programs that we operate. It's one of the largest spenders. Why is that? So we have 7 engineers. They sit all around the state and they work with farms. So sometimes it's technical assistance just to identify an issue and help address it. And in other cases, it's financial assistance. So there's 2 avenues of assistance that are provided. One, and the most primary, is matching EQIP. EQIP is Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's a federally administered program through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS. So our program supports the farmers for the contribution of the total project cost. So I included an example up here in the corner of the screen. An example is, let's say we have one project that costs a farm $550,000. You alluded, Senator, to the increasing costs. We have seen exponential increases in concrete and contractors, you name it, cost more to build more. Okay. The feds are limited at a maximum to 75% of the cost. Typically, we see costs between 40% and 60% being covered by federal project costs. The state can match. They can't exceed the federal amount, they can match towards the project, and then the farmers always have skin in the game, they're always required to provide 10% or more of total project costs. But these projects are big projects, and they have very high dollar values to them. The other avenue of financial assistance is we can provide farmers with a grant that's not matching a federal contract, and sometimes those are smaller projects, so I'm gonna give you guys a couple of brief examples here. This was a project where, the farm was inspected, there were some issues observed around their feed. These are hog silos, so you're harvesting feed off a very large amount of cropland and you're storing it in one area, which means you have a really high concentration of nutrients. So this is where our inspectors spend a lot of time, right around the production area, they're looking at concentrated nutrients and assigning risk issues, and our engineers are able to work with this farm to implement a practice that basically enables them to manage this area in a way where they can clean it, right? So it's paved, they can scrape it and make sure that the runoff or any water that comes through this area goes directly into their pit, where it's then field applied according to a nutrient management plan. Here's another example, it's an organic farm, they have requirements where their animals need to be outside for a certain amount of time, right? So before this barnyard was put in place, the farm was letting their animals out onto a rocky hillside, which leads to erosion. Those are the types of issues we're identifying on farms and trying to create a solution for. So in the case of this project, it was about $86,000 in state costs that went towards this project. This farm is located directly adjacent to Lake Seymour, Northeast Kingdom. So the proximity to water is always a big part of the concern here. A couple more brief examples for you. So you have a denuded barnyard area, upper left-hand corner, post-project, a large heavy use area with animal trails to that heavy use area to make sure that the animals are spending more time in what we call an improved surface that has the ability to be managed, the ability to keep clean, and ensure that any runoff from that is then piped or pumped directly into a storage system. On the bottom, it was entrance and exit to the barn, right? So if cows are going in and out, there needs to be improved surfaces in many cases to make sure that they can do so without causing major impacts to nearby waterways. So looking at our VMP program last year, we put grant agreements in place with farms. So we got 47 farms on board with projects, about 3.6 million. At the same time, we had 53 projects going through completion and getting paid out last year. So construction cleaning up, invoices being collected and reviewed, practices being certified. From those 53 completed projects, we had 105 structural practices. And you can see over the course of the year, engineers are out on farms all year. So right now, we're receiving applications that are coming in. Got over 40 applications since January 1st. We need funding to be able to support these projects. As you can see, and I apologize for the abbreviations here, certified small farm, CSFO to small farm, medium farm, large farm, and WQ points. These engineers are not just supporting large farms, they're not just supporting small farms. They're working with farms of all sizes who need assistance to reduce their impacts of water. This is where it gets a little bit more to the, what are the impacts of this proposed cut? So the state has had the opportunity to enjoy some recent ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding in the last 3 state fiscal years. So this is our budget for this program. This is our capital and ARPA funds together in a single graph. The green line is the anticipated federal funding for the NRCS EQIP program. And I spoke to that briefly earlier. It's one of the ways that we use funding for this program. We match the cost of the project that farmers are implementing through a federal program. So what that means is the feds are about to receive an exponential increase in funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. They are about to see a budget that they have never seen in Vermont ever before. NRCS is an incredible partner in the work that we do. Farms do not have the cash to make those projects happen without state match dollars. So we anticipate a considerable pressure on this program specifically for the incoming 2 state fiscal years. And this is a direct result of the Inflation Reduction Act investments. So NRCS is a very large budget. They're looking to us to make sure that farms can access these funds and implement these projects. If we look specifically at assuming a 15% match rate to these, our budgets at the state level for this program would have to be upwards of 5.8 to 6.6 billion. We are currently proposed under the state's budget constraints at 1.75. That's a combination of 550 plus the 1.2 and one-time clean water funds, which Secretary Moore alluded to. So we are very ready to utilize the 1.75 for state fiscal 25. Like I said, we have 44 applications. We've received since January 1st. We have engineers who will be on site on those projects.
So just to be clear, just make sure I'm clear,
Yeah.
550,000 buys 1.7. Is that what you just said?
One more time, sorry.
550,000 buys $1.7 million.
So we have 550,000 coming from the capital fund and we have 1.2 in one-time clean water funds.
Okay.
So our budget for this program is 1.75
Okay,
for the governor and the Clean Water Board recommended. And that will buy us as much of that 29 million in federal fiscal 25 as the feds are gonna get.
okay.
It's not gonna get us all the way there. But it is what we have this year proposed by the governor.
But with the 550 gone, you just have the 1.2.
Correct.
And then somewhere I have a note that ARPA was supposed to be selling.
Yes, I can speak to that. I actually hit the slide because I didn't want to get you guys confused. So there's a little bit more context here. In the recent Budget Adjustment Act, there was 6 million in ARPA American Rescue Plan Act funds appropriated to the Agency of Agriculture to this line item. If you review the state Clean Water Board and governor recommended budgets for state fiscal 23 and 24, they were different than what got passed in legislation. Nick has left us, so I can't rely on him. Essentially, how ARPA went through the process is different than what the state's done in the past, and some things got mixed up. So for the past year and a half, there's been 6 million at ANR, and folks have been asking them to report, and they kindly reminded folks that those funds are supposed to be to the Agency of Agriculture for this program, these programs. So it was an adjustment. We have 65 projects that are anticipated to be executed into grant agreements within the next month and a half that have been made for these funds since the last 2 years.
Waiting for the 6 million, but that's a separate thing than what we're talking about.
Correct, yep. So the law passed, these funds are in process in our agency and we're in the process of executing them. I believe that seeing the Capital Budget Adjustment Act process through, the House was seeing these funds and anticipating that maybe it was sufficient for our programming, but the point of confusion became the Agency of Agriculture was anticipating and expecting these funds in fiscal 23. And the start of fiscal 24, which was July 1st of last year. So we've had projects on hold, essentially waiting for this money available. But it still leaves us, like I said, with a 66% at 1.7, right? Which is the proposed, that leaves us at a 66% cut from previous years. That's counting, including that 6 million in the years we should have received.
So you're saying that 6 million is not available
Correct.
to you? Okay, and that may be what the House thought was available.
Yes.
So I assume that the other committee had, in their opinion, a good reason to move the 550 somewhere else. I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you know where it went and what the rationale was for moving it?
I am not sure where it went. I would ask Nick, and I'm sure he'd be willing to kind of track exactly where they put the 550 in the capital budget. I'm not aware exactly of where
Okay,
it was moved.
yeah, we should check with them. Good, thank you. Any questions? Good job. Anybody else that wants to add to this?
Chair Levesque here to present, for the record, my name is John Petito. I'm the grant supervisor for the Clean Water Initiative
Yep.
program. I'm here to provide information to the committee if you're interested on the Clean Water Initiative performance report, what reporting requirements we're meeting with it, and some of the recent outcomes from the most recent report. So I'm happy to do that now. I know we're over time.
It's fine,
Okay.
I wanna, yeah, we wanna hear that, please.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, thank you for having me today. Again, I already introduced myself. I'm the grant supervisor for the Clean Water Initiative Program. My name is Sharon Petito. I am presenting this on behalf of my colleague Claire Madden, who can't be here today. She really is the brains of the operation. I'm tracking and accounting specialist, so I'm also providing her contact information for you all, and we'll follow up for any questions I can't answer myself. So I'll be chatting actually very briefly because Secretary Moore talked a lot about water quality in Vermont and how we approach tracking it. And then explain sort of the reporting obligations that we have as a state and how the Clean Water Initiative Performance Report meets those obligations. Diving into how we measure progress and some highlights from the most recent report, which covers through state fiscal year 2023. And then I'll finish by sharing some key takeaways and resources where you can find a lot more data that Secretary Moore was referring to, cross-sectioning off by basin, however you would like the investments, the outputs, and impact. So I will skip this slide. You've already heard the overview about TMDLs and how they exist for the state. They exist at varying scales. But I do want to highlight or re-highlight the black lines on this map to the left for you. So these are, while we have 29 TMDLs in the state, this map indicates the large scale nutrient TMDLs that really drive our regulatory and funding work. So the green are where the phosphorus TMDLs exist, dark green for Lake Champlain, light green for Lake Memphremagog, and then the blue indicates a 5-state TMDL for nitrogen through the Long Island Sound.
And are those basins?
Right, so thank you, that's why I was putting on this slide. The red line, the black lines indicate the 15 tactical basin planning basins that we use to actually report back to EPA on progress and break down our implementation plan for the TMDL.
Is that Bennington one, Hudson River maybe?
Yeah.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
it's the orange, that's the river drainage.
And the green, which is Orleans County area, that goes north to the Seaway?
Memphremagog.
Yeah, goes,
Yeah.
okay. The one nobody can say. Yes.
I know. Really pretty.
Yeah.
So we do track, report, and account on our investments, our outputs, and the impact of those investments. And the reporting is our mechanism to assess our progress towards our TMDL goals. The Clean Water Initiative Performance Report, a few photos of the prior years of this, is our vehicle by which we do this reporting. We deliver it, we compile it and deliver it annually to the legislature as well as to the EPA. And it meets multiple statutory requirements, both at the state level of, there's not statutory requirement at the federal level, but EPA reporting requirement. So Act 64 of 2015, which you might be familiar with, which is Vermont's Clean Water Act, has a whole bunch of stuff that it achieves, including additional regulations for non-point source across multiple sectors in ag, in developed lands and roads, et cetera. It also created the Clean Water Board and the Clean Water Fund in its early rendition of it to provide the financing mechanism to move forward with these clean water goals. But the piece where reporting comes in is it enhanced all the tracking and reporting that we should do and required what is now compiled into this performance report. So building on top of that, Act 76 of 2019, or the Clean Water Service Delivery Act, created a long-term funding source for the Clean Water Fund. I think it's the addition of the meals and rooms tax there. It also established 4 different grant programs and added an additional reporting requirement that this performance report would report on the progress of those grant programs and whether they're adequately funding the Clean Water Initiative in the long term. In addition to the state reporting requirements, we use this report to report to EPA on our progress towards the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog TMDLs, which I'll touch on briefly in the next slide. So in 2019, the Vermont negotiated with the EPA what's called this accountability framework. So this is sort of the process by which we create our report, we send it to EPA, they review our progress, and then we get report cards every year about how well EPA feels we're doing. This framework doesn't exist for every TMDL across the country, but it's a really great tool in situations where the TMDL is relying on pollution to be reduced from non-point sources. Largely because that's hard to do, right? There's thousands of landowners, lots of different land uses. We're not looking at a point source, a single wastewater treatment facility. And so in those cases, this accountability framework provides more frequent and more detailed reporting to the EPA so they can really have some more transparency on our progress over this full 20-year TMDL life cycle. So this in Vermont, it's unique to Lake Champlain to have this full accountability framework, but it does exist across the country in some other areas like the Chesapeake Bay. And as you know, the Lake Champlain TMDL is a decades-long endeavor. It's 20 years, and Vermont breaks it up into a 5-year planning segments. And that's where we go back to those local tactical planning basins. So we take the full target and the tactical basin plans create 5-year interim targets. And we use the tactical basin planning process to ID the priority actions. What are the projects we're going to do on the ground? Who are the great partners we can use? Let's do it, let's track it, let's report back on it, let's estimate what the impact is, what the phosphorus reduced came from those, and then we report to EPA and we get this report card. So the tactical basin planning process is an important key component of the full report, and then the image on the left just shows the cycle of by which, so it kind of goes on a rotating cycle for 5 years, and interim and final reports are required for each basin. These are compiled as an addendum to the Clean Water Initiative Performance Report. So this is how these basin plans and the performance report get merged together and submitted to the EPA. And as Secretary Moore indicated, EPA keeps a close eye on our progress. To date, all of our progress has been satisfactory, but as you saw from that snippet of their letter, they are concerned about the pace of progress and are looking for us to accelerate. And we haven't yet received our progress determination for this most recent report as we just released it in January. So now turning to the one most. Oh,
Can I go back to that, why they're so concerned? I guess I meant to drill into that a little bit more. What are they basing that, what are they basing their concern on? That it's not fast enough? Or they think you can do better? Or how are they basing that? What are they taking for a measurement to say you're not doing good enough?
Yeah, sure. If I can actually jump to the impact slide I have here. This is not the exact one that Secretary Moore was showing, but because it's a set 20 years, there's actually a final in 2036 goal that we're trying to get to. And then there's a starting goal, right? So this is actually the reverse of what you saw before, where this actually does go down. We want the numbers to go down over time. But it's just a trend line projection of saying, okay, we're starting at 630 metric tons that we're pumping into Lake Champlain based on that time period of 2001 to 2010. We want to get to 418 metric tons. So we're not getting to zero. We know that's not achievable. We want to get to 418. So that means a reduction of 212, maybe, I can't do that off the top of my head. Yeah. Over those 20 years. And so this is the first 8. So we're at about 20% that we've reduced of the total reduction we need to. And as you heard from Secretary Moore, we're about a third of the way through this time. So you would hope if we're a third of the way through time, we're about a third of the way through reductions. We're not quite there. So that's sort of one example how it's not going to be linear. We understand that, but we do need to sort of pick up the pace.
So what did they base the goal on to begin with? Did they just pick the number out of the air saying this is what we want to do? Or, I mean, there had to be the way they got to that number. Do you know how they got to that? What made them pick that number to begin with? Maybe it's unattainable.
I am not an expert in the development of the TMDL, but I'm happy to get you more background information on it. My understanding is that all TMDLs are based on our water quality standards. So we set state level water quality standards, and there's a water quality standard phosphorus in Lake Champlain. And then once we hit that, then we say, how far are we above it? What are the reductions that have to come per major watershed? But I can follow up with all.
Fair enough. No, it's I'm talking something that's been determined, agreed to a long time ago, and to have you go back and get all that back to me, it's not gonna change anything. So all I here do is try to change things, or be able to make decisions based on what we can do here. So, I'm good.
I can tell you, I do believe it's a fairly robust public process and engagement between the state and the EPA through this target setting as well. But yes, happy to get more information on the process. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but hopefully gives you some sense of like trend lines of what they're leaning on for that. So we did mention that, progress needs to happen across multiple land use sectors. We do report by land use sector in the report too. So we report on the investments by sector, the outputs, and the impact by sector too. And there's color coding throughout the report. You can access it at the link on this slide that I've shared with you if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper. But generally across all of these sectors, despite sector differences, they're really doing some very similar things, right? They're capturing the snow melt, they're capturing the rain runoff, slowing it down, trying to keep that sediment from getting into the streams. And then also, some of this work is improving our natural infrastructure to do its own job, like improving access to floodplains and stream bank stability, et cetera.
So those are the sectors.
So these are the sectors exactly that we generally categorize and track our work and report our work. So I said that we talk about investments, outputs, and income. So what has investments looked at since state fiscal year 2016 or the passage of Act 64? It's been $420 million in state directed work since that time. And as you can see, state fiscal year 2023 has been one of the hugest years of investment, state directed investment into clean water work. The variation kind of is reflective of a lot of different things across those sectors: project readiness, when different funds become available, and the timing of funding rounds. So that's sort of part of the variation between the sectors. You can see in 2021, there was a lull impacted by COVID, that affected both the capacity of us and our partners, but also the available funding that went into the Clean Water Fund. And then you can see that some of that funding really rebounded in state fiscal year 2022 and 2023. A lot of that is buffered by the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, but also, as Secretary Moore indicated, the property transfer tax surcharge was running quite hot too. So the Clean Water Fund also received some interesting COVID impacts as well.
And you carry money over to the next fiscal year that you don't spend, right?
The Clean Water Fund does, yeah, exactly. The goal, as Secretary Moore was talking about, the goal is to really not to try and spend it down. We do carry a contingency reserve in case we kind of fall under that, but there is sometimes in the most recent years, the projections have just been much lower than what has actually come in. So we've been carrying it forward and filling that capital bill gap with the one-time funding. So these are some examples of project outputs across state fiscal year 2016 to 2023. So these are things counting like number of acres, number of trees planted, number of miles improved, et cetera. Those help us sort of quantify the results of the investments. These are just a select few across the sectors. We do track these at every phase of projects, from identification to design and implementation. And they're standardized across the agencies so that we can get a more consistent count of what's coming in. This represents work from state-funded work, as well also regulatory requirements, and from our federally funded reporting partners like the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. So there is a huge body of work that my colleague Claire undertakes to help coordinate everyone's reporting. And then finally, on to impact, which we're talking about nutrient reductions. And Secretary Moore talked about this a little bit, but what we're really talking about is model estimates. This report is talking about what our estimates are based on what things have been put in the ground. So we have vetted and published methodologies to assign an estimated phosphorus reduction for certain practices that we fund. And those phosphorus reduction estimates kind of change based on practice specification. So these graphs show what we estimate as phosphorus reduction achieved over the last 8 years, categorized by land use sector, with Lake Champlain on the left and Lake Memphremagog on the right. And as you can see, agriculture sector has really taken a large chunk of that progress, or upheld a large chunk of that progress. And as you can also see, it's not a linear process in our reductions, that things can slow over time. There's a lot of sector-specific factors that feed into this. Secretary Moore talked a little bit about the annual practices that we rely on for ag. So in years where there's a dip in participation, like in 2023, you can see a dip from us in terms of our reductions because it didn't re-implement those. Another thing that we kind of expected is this slowdown, because we're really early on in implementation phase or implementation of the TMDL. We were really writing out those ready to go projects. And now it's going to take a little bit more effort to move forward, and these projects are a bit more complex than what's left. So it is somewhat expected that this project is slowing down too. I already showed this slide. There's a similar one right after this for Lake Memphremagog, but this is saying not just what are the total reductions, but how does it look in relation to what we're trying to get to. So this is a visual you can return back to. I won't dive into it very deeply here, but other than to say it's another way to demonstrate that our progress is slow. And it is really important to keep up with the investments and the commitment that the state has to fund the Clean Water Initiative at $50 to $60 million a year. And then in terms of context and key takeaways, there are a lot of factors at play not really fully represented in the data provided today. And so I just want to mention some of those for your general awareness. Many of the funding programs at DEC have shifted to a block grant structure where we rely on a regional partner to hold a lot of our money and then solicit the projects and send those out. Part of that was propelled by Act 76, which created the Clean Water Service Provider Network, but we also use funding program administrators and other programs that we fund as well. That actually helps to remove some of the state level bottlenecks that we hope will kind of ramp up implementation long term. We're also expanding our investments in the capacity of the clean water workforce. It's really critical right now that this workforce has the right staff so they can receive all the short-term funding that's coming in with ARPA. But we're also hoping those investments will support us over the life of the TMDLs, 20 years, to really have that workforce in place to move those projects forward. As Secretary Moore mentioned, the state's been really expanding on the regulatory, financial, and technical assistance since Act 64, and now it's really starting to hit the ground running. We expect that that's going to come to play too as we see future reports. We're also expanding our ability to capture results on the ground. We don't have the full picture right now. We have some projects where we have a way to estimate the phosphorus reduction, but not all the things we fund can we do that. So those things are happening, and we're improving our approach to that so that we can then account for that into the future. And Senator, you had asked, do we count the phosphorus reductions in the Connecticut River Basin? And I wanted to correct myself that we do track all the specifications of the BMPs that we install in that watershed, and we have a way to calculate phosphorus from that, but it's not kind of currently being tracked in our database just because it's not included enough there.
So you could go.
We could go back and do that, exactly, yeah. So I hope that is helpful.
Yes, definitely.
And so I'm also fortunate that many of these practices, I think just big picture context, many of these practices really have a lot of co-benefits. This is really evolved and enforced by the TMDL, which focuses on clean water, but all of these things really have health benefits or flood resilience co-benefits, habitat ecosystem benefits as well. And then the last thing to share with you, so this is the dashboard that Secretary Moore was talking about. This is the Clean Water Interactive Dashboard. So there's the performance report, which sort of summarizes big picture about the investments, outputs, and impact. But if you click on this image or use this QR code, you can go to this dashboard where you can really play with the data and get a lot more detail and zoom into, I want to know how much investments were in this tactical basin. Or I want to know how much we spent on wastewater or the number of wastewater facilities that were refurbished over the last 8 years. So this is a great place to play around if you're really curious about your specific area. I think you can also search by town, although for sure you can search by tactical basin. Tactical kinetic basin.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
We were running, yep.
Oh, are we okay?
Yeah, we are, yes.
So Secretary Moore kept talking about getting a report card, but I never heard whether we're getting an A, B, C, D, or F. Okay, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't know the answer. The second thing I'm curious about, the Clean Water Initiative gets funded with those three sources. So the property transfer tax, the rooms and meals, and the sheets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that at some point that they take a number and that's your budget for the year. But there may be additional revenue coming in. Obviously, as you correctly point out, the property transfer tax has gone absolutely crazy in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years. I assume the rooms and meals tax, you know, given an event like yesterday where we had some 100,000 people coming in and we got a $50 million bump in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that money stay in the general fund, but just does not get allocated to the Clean Water Initiative?
So my understanding is that the Clean Water Fund is a special fund, so the things that are designated to go into the funds do move into the fund. I do have an image for you if it's helpful about how things are projected over time. So we do get twice a year, we get reports out from the e-board about what the projections are gonna be. We get it from, so in July or August, we say, what just happened in the close of the last fiscal year? Do we need to make any corrections? What is the updated projection for the current fiscal year? And what's the new one that we're about to build a budget for? What do you think that's gonna be like for the future fiscal year? And so that happens twice a year, and there's sort of tracking and corrections that are made. And so we use the July, August one to build a budget. And then in February, we sort of say what's happened.
Yeah.
And then we go back at the close of the next one and we make adjustments. And for the most part, we've not needed to use the contingency reserve most recently because we've had this weird rollover of things going gangbuster in other sectors. Okay, there's a useful, was that confusing or was that helpful?
No, it's helpful.
It's
I didn't know if there was any, quarters left in the cushions of the couch, I guess, if you kind of.
Oh, sure, yeah, and as Secretary Moore mentioned, there is that 350, so that you might think is couch cushion, but it's including projected revenue to come in for the rest of, say, fiscal year
Okay.
24.
Yeah.
So last time we saw that, it was gonna be about almost 900,000, now it's 350, things are projecting downwards, and so that might be zero or negative by the time we actually close
Gotcha.
the fiscal year, because we do spend the same year that we're supposed to earn those revenues.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair. So I'm thinking about my local town and they have their impaired waterways and blah, blah, blah. How does that filter into what you do, or do you delegate that to other groups like the Lake? Like, where do those impaired waterway decisions come from? Is that through the state? Or does that come through the EPA? I'm just trying to like put the pieces together.
Oh, gosh, yeah, so this, so I work in the Water Investment Division, and
Okay,
it's
so
more
that
about the
doesn't-
money, but I do know that the Watershed Management Division manages the listing of waters and the water quality
All right.
standards, so they update that, they can give you more information about when that listing happens. But I can also say that the tactical basin plans that get developed every year to take into account all of this information. It's really holistic process where they say, okay, for every basin, where are the impaired waterways? What are the priorities? How are we gonna meet multiple goals, both the TMDL for Lake Champlain, but the local needs too? And then who are the big partners that we want to use to help us with that work?
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I think we're ready to move on.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you
really good.
very, very
Your
much.
energy was more important this time of day. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and the report was easy to find on the
Oh, great.
website, so
Okay.
thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Committee, we're gonna move on to, we're running a little bit behind here. We're gonna move on to Middlesex Secure Residential Recovery Facility. Remember that we do not deal with policy in this committee. We're just basically gonna make sure between, maybe Joe can give us a little bit of, Joe can give us just a little bit of, why we wanted folks to come in. We just basically wanna make sure we have Tyler Allen on the screen as well. We just wanna make sure that, the facility that you guys were originally gonna spend $350,000 on, now it's down to $50,000. We just wanna make sure, Mr. Allen, that, the buildings you're moving into are gonna be sufficient for you. You're gonna be happy there. Tell us whatever you need to do to tell us as far as, what's going on in the Middlebury, facility.
Good afternoon to the committee.
Middlesex, excuse me.
Good afternoon to the committee. My name is Tyler Allen. I'm the Family Services Director, Adolescent Services Director. I think I'm here at will of the committee. Any updates around Middlesex? Is it working for our needs? The renovations to the facility have been made. So it is ready to be operational at this point. We are currently going through the emergency preparedness plan with BGS to make sure that we can get a fire marshal approval so that we can have occupancy of the building. And so what the short-term plan will be is for us to use it as an alternative staffing setting. So it will satisfy a need for the temporary while we continue to finalize our contracting procedure to get a private provider to come in and administer it as a secure facility. And so optimistically, we are hoping for June for it to be operational as a secure treatment facility. But there are challenges to establishing that contract with the provider, namely because we don't have a secure facility within state, and we are trying to work with the treatment provider to do something that isn't otherwise being done. So it's not entirely, it's not already been built. We're kind of building some of the processes and procedures and working those into contracting at this point. But the building is ready for us to use today.
So this was gonna be the project that was originally gonna be established up in St. Albans, is that correct? Was these talked about in the St. Albans area or everywhere?
At one point, we had talked about St. Albans as an opportunity. Originally, we had talked about a facility in Newbury that we would, and that was a kind of long, protracted development process.
This is the same Beckett type property that you were gonna do in Newbury?
Similar. So this is a temporary facility. This isn't the long-term and permanent facility for secure treatment, but a permanent facility will take a couple years to actually get operational. So this is supposed to bridge us till such a time as we have a permanent facility within use.
Okay, this is made to be 4 to 6 people that are gonna be there. And
4.
4, okay. These
4 people. Yep.
Is this in addition to anything that we were doing before, or this is is this extra capacity?
This is extra capacity compared to what we have right now. The idea is to bridge us till such a time as we have a permanent facility. So at that point, we won't continue to utilize this. That building is, it's usable. It looks great right now, but it is past its expected life duration. It's a temporary building. So it will work for us for the next couple years until we can have a permanent facility available.
Okay. And it's functional, operational, ready to go.
It's functional and operational, ready to go. It's just a matter of getting it staffed.
I got the SCA in the room. Who's staffing that?
Well, for temporarily, if we are to utilize it, it would be one of our alternative settings. So it would be staffed with state workers or foster care family or other providers that we can identify. That's if we use it. There are a couple alternative settings at our disposal. Once we have it operational fully operational, the program brought in and under contract, then locks will be put on the doors. It will become a secure facility. For temporary until that happens, and we're talking a couple months. If we need to use it, it would be an unlocked facility.
Okay. And the reason why we're getting a little deeper than what we normally get deeper into is because we prepare our capital bill and we have to go on the Senate floor and we get a lot of questions, and sometimes we get questions that are out of our purview, that the House institutions and corrections handle, but we don't. So so that's why we're trying to stay in our lane a little bit, but we might get outside of it just a hair. So a few more questions. The goal is for this to be just a temporary facility, as you said, and you guys are still actively searching for a site to put a facility that's permanent, correct?
Yes, we are quite far down the process of finding a location for a facility, but that involves, we're working with our partners at BGS, and there is a design build process that went out. There's an RFP procedure, so that process is well underway, but it will take some time to build that structure. So this is a temporary facility that will bridge us until we get through that process. And it is a vitally needed service.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tyler, thanks for being here. Are these the youth that are hanging out in emergency rooms, or am I
It could be.
population you're gonna serve? Because I thought there was a sort of adolescent care in other ways as well.
Well, it could be. So I think if we're talking about our very temporary use, as in until we can get this program up and established, it could be for any youth that we are in placement crisis, we cannot find a placement, and it would be extremely short duration placement utilizing our staff. Hopefully that doesn't need to happen, And hopefully we can get our contract up and running so a provider's in there. When we're talking about that, that's the real intention behind this renovation, is the program that'll be in place. That is specifically for youth experiencing that are in need of crisis stabilization that have some sort of delinquent matter attached to their case profile. So it wouldn't be just any youth in a hospital. It would be specifically youth that need to be held for purposes of their safety or the safety of their family or community or others. So it is, but it very well could be youth who are in the hospital. Right now, there are youth that end up sitting in hospitals because of crisis needs. And those youth might have delinquent matters that are part of the equation as well.
And can you remind me, are there any beds right now designated for that service, or are these 4 beds supposed to be, the only ones we're gonna have?
These 4 beds will be the only secure placement beds in the state.
Thank you.
Can we call these justice involved use?
Yes, they would be justice involved, but I am cautious to just let us, these are treatment programs. And so the
Right.
purposes of the treatment program is not purposes of detention, but therapeutic intervention. But they would be justice involved youth.
Okay, again, Tyler, we're dancing a little bit. We're really trying not to get right deep into it. Because it is kind of our purvey, but we're trying to get into it deep enough to where we can explain it when we present this on the floor. So.
Of course.
Committee. Yes,
Thank you. So there's 4 rooms or beds.
Correct.
And then is there room for staff too, to be there?
There
Like-
is. The building itself is actually 2, you can think of them as 2 modular buildings or trailers that are put together in a T. And the program that we're looking to have these 4 beds on are in one part of the T. And the other part of the T would be locked off from the youth. We've secured the part where the residents are. We've made that, we've hardened that, so it's not, it would be very difficult to abscond from. But the other part has not been hardened or renovated, and the staff can utilize that space.
Okay, and they would utilize it whenever
Yes.
we're there, right?
Absolutely.
is there a fence around this facility?
There is a fence around a courtyard so that the youth have access to, outdoor time and outdoor space. So yes, but it's not, the fence isn't a full perimeter fence around the whole
Just around
facility.
the area on that part of the. Okay.
There's actually 2 areas, one small area and one bigger area. So there are 2 fenced in outdoor areas.
Okay.
And are you contracting with other companies? Is that what you're saying?
So our objective is to contract with a therapeutic provider to provide this service. Yes, this would not be state staff.
So would the therapeutic provider also be the controlling entity, the security entity?
Yeah, well, they'll operate the program as we would any other residential program. The difference between this and other residential programs is the lock on the door.
So do we contract for anything like that now?
Well, we contract for a number of residential programs. They're just simply unlocked. And it's why it's a little bit of a challenge to work through the nuances of contracting with them, because they're a therapeutic provider and we're wanting to make sure the practice procedures and policies are appropriate for a secure building as well.
Right. I mean, to me, the security is that is a major difference from the other therapeutic. But
So these 4 beds typically, we don't have a facility for them now. These people would be out of state if or not even there.
No, these people would go into our community-based residential system of care, crisis stabilization system of care. So that would be programs without locked doors. And then what has to happen if a person has an acute level of need where there's risk of harm to themselves or others, those programs typically reduce their census dramatically so that they can provide additional staffing to give the youth the supports they need in those programs. Obviously, this creates enormous problems for limiting the capacity of our crisis stabilization network and is a major contributing factor to why we struggle with youth placement in the state.
Oh, because they displaced other programs? Is that what you said?
Yeah, because the same kid who would go into the secure program is instead going into a community-based unlocked crisis stabilization program. And so that program says, okay, I'll work with you. I'll work with that kid to try to get them their needs. But to do so, they need to take up 3 bed spaces or 4 bed spaces because I have to apply so much staff to the scenario. So they reduce their census, which means other kids who would be going through that residential program or that crisis stabilization program don't have anywhere to go. And that's part of the reason why we're stuck in this situation where we're looking to staff using social workers, family services workers to staff in an alternative setting, which isn't ideal for the department, for the youth, for the families, or for anyone. But we're forced into that situation.
So just 2 more questions. Can the families stay nearby?
We're trying to figure out how visitation will work in this program, in the secure program. By stay nearby, this program is in Middlesex, so there are local.
Hotels and stuff. Okay, cool.
Yep.
And then last question. I think you might have said this. When do you expect to have the provider?
Our hope is we're in negotiation with the provider over that contract now. Our hope is to have that contract finalized as early as this week, and that we could maybe have a program operational by June. That might be optimistic, but we're kind of all cylinders firing right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
committee, we crossed into the gray area, but I wanted to cross it enough for you guys, and once this gets explained on the floor, are you guys comfortable?
Yeah, it's really helpful. I wish I had your vocabulary. Thank you for giving me some words for this.
We might ask you back, as we get ready to present this, but you've been very helpful. I think we got an understanding, so again, apologize for the dance, but again, we gotta be mindful of what we're, allowed to be touching and not. The building is something that we're more than interested in, but we know we'll get questions on the floor enough to where we had to understand what was going on there. So that's why we had you in, and I think we're good.
You're welcome to my time, and should the committee have any other questions or need me for anything, don't hesitate. I'd be happy to come back.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, thank you for that. Thank you for honoring the boundaries. Appreciate it, but we had to know enough about it to where we could explain it. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the section 3, Department of Corrections. We got Al Cormier, Christian Calver, and see here, let's just take a brief shot at this. I think probably there was a few different things that maybe you guys were missing some monies on or what have you, so we're interested in hearing about how that's gonna impact you guys as far as any of your plans that you're trying to move forward with. Let's just refresh ourselves here a little bit. I think we're probably talking about the booking expansion, talking about the, well, Joe's, I think, has gone through the HVAC. I think
In line 28.
on 28. Yeah, we've talked about the feasibility study, but I think we're gonna talk about that a little bit more, so. Let's just start with section 3 and see what you're comfortable talking with. And just go down through there and tell us where you guys have got clipped or where you got more money, you got too much money, I'm sure on a couple of those lines, and you wanna give some back, so. No, so let's start it out. Start it.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Afternoon, Al Cormier, Chief of Operations, in the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Al. And so, yeah, so the gist of it is that, there's a lot of money's been moving around here and, I guess I need to know if, how those are gonna impact you, whether you're gonna be able to complete. So obviously, the governor had recommended as far as, what, working with you folks as far as some of these projects, some of this money's missing now, and so we're curious about whether you're gonna be able to complete these projects as you are willing to, I mean, as you have monies for, or, you know, how it's gonna impact you and. So we'll let you go.
Okay, as you stated, we talked about the HVAC before, and that's still moving along. Again, something that we are needing in our facilities, both for the population and the staff. Facilities costs and cramp and old, right? So that's a big focus for us, is getting that project off the ground. I think the big one right now is that booking expansion at Northwest. That has been a priority for us, and we talked about that in this committee as well. Expanding upon that project, it's a very small facility, it's an old facility. I think we have 9 beds in there right now in our booking area. Since we've moved Chittenden to a female-only facility and converted Chittenden County Manly takes to St. Albans, that's put a huge burden on that facility from a capacity standpoint. And we county being our largest county and converting all of those detainers to that facility. Certainly has, in fact, that booking area on the weekends cramped, inefficient and unsafe. That's one that we're really trying to push that forward to stay in that area. Both monitor and improve the safety and security in that area.
So we had, $3.1 million on that, and you're down, $500,000, you're at $2.6 million now. Are you gonna be able to move forward on that project? What's that gonna do to you?
Well, I guess that's on Mr. Asia to answer that from a program perspective.
Thank you, Al.
Yeah, sure. Happy to oblige.
For the record, Joe Asia with Director for Design and Construction and Buildings and General Services. Right now, the RFP will soon be going out for that design, and we'll be looking to get that underway sooner than later. Perhaps much sooner, I'm not 100% sure. But the lack of that funding coming forth, the funding that was cut, limits us to do a construction management style project, because the layout of the existing facility with the admin location where it is and the booking area, they're somewhat side by side, but not. But in the situation we're looking at doing is probably expanding the booking area into the existing administration area. And with that, we have to do the administration area first, if that's the case, and how to lay that out. And instead of trying to probably wait till the design is 100% complete, we could be moving forward with the administration portion of it, starting that work while we're still completing the nuances of the booking area. So that's the area, that's where we're at right now. When we start the design process, I'm not 100% sure how this is going to lay out with the money that we have, and also having to come back next year and request for the balance of the funds, whatever that may be. I think it'll be more than 500,000.
Committee. Yep, go.
Do you have funds already set aside for prior years for this?
We do not.
You do not, okay.
So you say you're going out for design, so is
That is
is
correct.
that? Will it just be the design that you get a amount for?
No, there's more than enough here for design and start construction until I have a better idea of what that design is going to look like. I'm not sure how much funding I will need for construction.
Okay,
So, but this would be the start of it. And if I'm going with the construction management approach, the construction manager comes on board roughly at the end of schematic design. They help with the final estimate at that point in time and then move forward with the project. And we can also start sooner for construction. The way the layout is there, if you haven't been in the facility, you're coming off of the parking lot, you're heading downhill to the administration building. So how that is going to work when we relocate the administration area sort of uphill of that, and how it's gonna lay out, that's still part of the hard part, and how it's going to interact with the rest of the building. But those are the things that we have to do, the design process will start first when we get our construction manager on board.
So when will you know the cost of construction?
I don't know offhand what the schedule is for the completion of schematic design. I gotta believe it'll be within 6 months. I'll have that. It'll be, and at that same point in time, we'll be soon starting the RFP process for a construction manager.
So it'll be during FY 25.
Yes.
Okay, so
So
that's,
I'm sorry,
no, that's the challenge.
so best case scenario, you can start the project, worst case scenario, you're gonna have to come back here and find some more money.
Correct. Granted, some of that was, again, not even to defer any more funding because of the larger projects. With DOC has coming forward with the women's special facility, but there's also, the other projects that we have going. So,
Let me ask you a different way as well. Does the $500,000 slow you down or just causes uncertainty as you get going with the project?
uncertainty at this point, I don't know if it'll slow us down because of how everything falls into place. I could probably get a long lead equipment order ready to go. I will be signing a contract with the construction manager for the full estimated amount. And as we have the funds in, they can advance with the construction, so.
Yeah,
So Joe, does design management mean that there'll be an attempt to, I don't know whether I should say reduce anything? Or I'm trying to get an idea what exactly
Sort of
that.
savings and costs would like for that.
Yeah,
With a construction manager on board there, you can take that, that can happen. Because what you're doing is you're bringing a construction manager, a contractor in for construction with the design going on. And the architect and engineering team can then reach out to the contractor and vice versa to have those discussions. You know, we're thinking of putting in this type of a unit, HVAC or something. And they may say that that type of a unit has a 52-week period from the time you place your order to arrival. This unit here is only a 36-week. And then so the design team would then, is that one equal? If so, that's what we would go with.
okay. That's helpful, thank you.
committee, any more questions about that or anything you guys want to add about that project there? Okay, good. Just going down through, Al, if you don't mind me just taking the lead a little bit. We've got, line, 25, which is the Women's Correctional Facility, Reentry Facility Replacement Planning. We have $13 million. That is to bank some money. Is that correct? And that's unchanged. Obviously, you guys are happy with that.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, going next, we're going down statewide, line 26, statewide corrections facility HVAC system planning, design, construction for upgrades and replacement. Looking at, lines 206, as well. That is, that was $562,026. That was government recommend. And that's been all kind of put together between 4.59 million. And, that's been all added together. That makes you all whole, correct? As far as on that line there, that doesn't slow you guys down any. So you're not basically losing any money. So we're good with that line. Okay, anybody got any questions about that? Okay. Lines 27, statewide correctional facility, accessibility upgrades. That was the dollars that you guys were asked to do when the feds came in and wanted to upgrade some of those from the accessibilities, or what are we trying to say?
It was the DOJ lawsuit.
DOJ lawsuit, you guys are good with that, you've got the money that's been added, it's all good, so not much more to talk about that, correct?
Correct.
Everybody good with that? Okay, this is the one that we've talked about a little bit some more, we're just gonna revisit it, and, I think that we're pretty much going to be, I think we pretty much know what's gonna happen to that money's there. That is just $200,000 that the House put in with the ideas of talking about, using the women's facility that's currently housing, women. And just to do a $200,000 plan to turn it into a men's reentry facility. But I think we're 5 to 7 years away from even having that type of discussion. I'm gonna make that a kind of a bold, statement out there. That dollars as far as $200,000 sitting there to talk about a men's reentry facility, in my opinion. You guys can be careful about how you say that, but that's probably a little premature. Is what my thought process is.
I can totally see that, but I would just like to hear from the other committee on, you know, a few.
Oh, we will, but, we'll hear it after we relocate the dollars. So, because, by the time that we get to that, it's going to be, 3 other studies, have to do that, so. Okay, so, yes,
Can I just ask, that money was put in someone's request, was that something that the committee came up with itself, or did they hear from folks?
I can answer that if you'd like.
Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Fitch, Commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. It was added in specifically by Tristan Roberts, who is a member of HCI, because he recognizes that if we're going to have a reentry system for the women, there should be one for the men as well, which I believe we're all supportive of. And that's the future vision for sure. I think it just comes down to resources and how many things we can advance at any given time.
yes,
But I think also, Commissioner, it's a matter of timing. If this isn't gonna happen in the next near future, won't there already have to be another one done at some point if the landscape changes? I don't mean that.
Yes,
landscape like
we
landscape.
testified in Senate Judiciary last week, towards the end of the week, and the same question came up. And I think what's going to happen is that Senator Sears or that committee is going to try to do an amendment to the capital bill, which will broaden it beyond Chittenden to say men's reentry in general, not necessarily a specific location.
okay,
So it kind of comes down to a couple factors, right? If we focus on Chittenden, it is correct, because Chittenden will be tied to wherever the future women's facility is. And so until the women move out, we can't do anything with Chittenden. So it's kind of, you're right, we can't repurpose it for men's until the women are somewhere else. That process is probably gonna take around, I'm gonna say 5 to 8 years. Because of funding and everything else, right? It's an expensive facility, there's quite a bit of permitting that we need to do, so it's gonna take time to do that one. In terms of planning and programming, usually we don't apply it to a specific location, that comes later in the planning process. So usually planning and programming is just Sabrina getting together with DOC and saying, please give me what your requirements are. And that's kind of what planning ends with. It says the facility will do this, it'll be X amount of beds, it will provide these kinds of spaces, that kind of thing. So you don't actually have to apply it to a physical space until later on down the road. I think the only benefit of potentially adding Chittenden, where Tristan was going, was an early look at saying, can Chittenden be repurposed or not? Or would it have to be dropped and you build something new there? But I agree that if we're not gonna move to a permanent facility anytime soon, those planning and programming requirements could change, right? As we continue to modernize the way in which we are in the settings that we're providing for different types of populations. So there's kind of that piece as well.
I would add that the male reentry component will be built on, so, you know, programmatic from our standpoint, not programmatic from BPS's standpoint. How that rolls out is gonna be part of the design of the women's reentry program and implementation, how do we mirror that at our other men's facilities, and it could come from the men's facility, it doesn't necessarily need to be at a different site, so those will be things that we're talking about as we build the reentry for women. How do we mirror that for the men as well?
But even if it's not tied to Chittenden, my only other thing would be how much demand can the capital bill take, right? So we've got women's correctional reentry in there, we've got potentially match for Montpelier flood. You've got forensics now that's gonna be coming into play. We're getting quite a bit of language around forensics. And so, and then there's all the other clean water, there's a lot of things that are supported in the capital bill. So then the secondary piece is, how much money will there be and how many things can we afford at any one time? Too, I mean, there is that piece.
which leads me to a little off topic, but you brought it up and I just it kind of hit me in the forehead. We're gonna have language on the forensic facility, and I'm gonna have you have to come in and bring the committee up to speed on that
Absolutely.
while we're making language for the forensics. So, so it's nothing we have to get into like at this point, but
Sure.
but I'll need you to come in and give us some language to tell us about that.
But so anyway, that was my whole point about there's just a lot in the future. Thank you. So that was very helpful. And that's first the question. Should we take up with South Burlington and allocate some amount of money, even if it's $1, to put a stake in the ground and say, we want to study the justice involved facility for men. And kind of put that stake in the ground so that in the future it shows up in our budget. And people know that we're thinking of that, and half the population say, why are you doing this for women? When we've already just said, we're gonna set aside some, even a small amount of money for a facility studying something.
And can I add to that?
Okay.
Or are we already doing that? Or where are your discussions with that? As far as whether it's at that facility or as far as anywhere else? I mean, we have 4 male facilities. Are we already in discussions already as far as where are we as far as male entry, re-entry? Let's certainly talk.
Internally, it's part of our strategic planning. So my earlier statement, we're talking about reentry for women, we're also talking about reentry for men. We're standing up our vocational training program, that will include both men's and women's facilities. That will be job readiness from the vocational side, so we'll start working towards how does that work towards a reentry for all men. And that's necessarily, it could be a facility, can it be done from a current facility now, with partnerships with local employers and so forth, so it's part of our strategic planning process.
So you already have resources basically baked into budgets elsewhere that you're coming up with strategies for male re-entry.
Correct.
Okay, so first of all, I do appreciate Representative Roberts putting this in and bringing it to our attention. I think that's helpful, and I understand what you were saying, Senator, about the same thing, basically, is that this should be something that we're thinking about. So the Senate Judiciary is looking at this. I mean, obviously I should know that, but I don't. I'm glad. Are there other things that they're looking at?
This was the only one that I'm aware of that BGS was pulled into the room for.
Okay, so that's something for us to talk about, because that's that coordination is obviously critical. So my understanding is that the rehab, I mean, it's not really rehab, but the vocational program is pretty far behind where it was supposed to be.
That's accurate.
Okay,
Yeah.
like hardly there.
Yeah,
Okay,
It's
so,
moving up on the priority list for me in my role.
okay, great,
We're meeting tomorrow on that. Discussing that.
good,
That forum, so
good.
that was part of the VCI shutdown to transition to vocational. And we run into some roadblocks getting it off the ground, but there's some thoughts and ideas to get that.
Okay. And I would see reentry as similar to vocational, but very,
But remember,
but different.
because what I want you to remember is what I'm talking about, just like the conversation we had before, we're about the building and not about those
Understand.
programs.
I know,
So
but the building and the programs are pretty connected.
they can be, as long as we're talking about this capital budget and not
Right.
trying to dictate what their policy is or what another committee's policy is.
I understand. So, so we talked about the other, not the forensics facility.
Yep.
And what did you say about?
We're
the
gonna-
forensics facility?
We're gonna have another conversation about that when we have the language. We have some language coming. And so it's hard to talk, it's hard to talk about that when we don't have the language. We can go round and round and round. And so I'm sure it'll be this week that I think Damien's coming in tomorrow. He was gonna try to come in today, but we ran over on time, so we'll see the language to see what we're talking about, but a lot of that's coming from appropriations.
Okay, and that's for adults.
That is for adults, yes.
Okay,
And it's a partnership between BGS, Dale, and DMH.
okay. So it'll be especially complicated. Cool. So then just last question for now. We haven't talked about the women's facility design in a while, so I'm presuming that it's generally the same, but maybe not. I don't know if we're gonna get that update now, or do you want to do that later?
We have them in the room.
That's
Okay,
why Sabrina is here today.
Okay,
And this
okay.
was also the reason why Senate Judiciary pulled us in as well. Was to learn more about women's correctional and reentry, and they're really focused on beds.
okay,
That was much of what they brought folks in the room for last week.
okay,
But then male reentry came into the conversation as well.
Right. and then beds, how do we translate beds into rooms?
Well,
What's
that's
the
where-
assumption?
That's where
Beds.
Sabrina comes, well,
Okay.
POC and Sabrina.
Okay,
Well,
is that what we're here for? I don't know. if
Well,
we have
we-
time.
I don't have a presentation ready, so
No,
just
you
answer
just-
questions.
no, just tell us who you are and just, maybe if, how you make it out on design, how we make it out.
So I'm Sabrina Parrish, I'm a project manager with BGS Design and Construction. So nothing design wise has changed from the last time I was here. We're not actually in any sort of design right now. We are in a site selection, site analysis process. We've identified some sites. We're working on identifying which of those are most feasible and working on test fitting our conceptual design on the sites.
So where were we on beds?
So we are,
We probably provided that presentation.
yes,
Some
I just.
Right, it was just
our
a
last
while ago.
presentation here, 'cause I-
Yeah,
So we are, so our rated bed capacity is for the secure is at 128 and 30 for the reentry. So that
And
gives us a total capacity of 158.
then how many beds per room?
So that depends on the type of room. So your standard room is usually a 2-person room, and that is for a variety of reasons. One of them is cost. Another one, which DOC can jump in here on the statistics of why they prefer to sleep double rooms related to suicide and overall general mental health well-being. There are some single rooms in the close custody units, in long-term care, acute mental health units like that,
Okay,
where there's behavioral issues or other issues where it's not feasible to house two together.
so we're not looking at 3 or 4.
No,
Okay,
not at this point in time.
okay,
And I believe, this is where I'm gonna speak, maybe hopefully not out of my area, but I believe we're not stacking beds, correct?
No, these are all on the floor. There would be no bunk beds.
Right. So I know that was a very big concern for both DOC and the women's population. It's really hard to climb up on that.
yeah,
level.
that makes sense.
And so those decisions like that, decisions like 2 in a room instead of 4, having beds on the floor instead of bunks, those all add space, which adds cost.
Okay.
I'm gonna see some single rooms. I have to tell you, I actually always have wanted bunk beds, like, cause I never had one when I was a kid. And then we rented a house on the Cape and there was a bunk bed for my kids and it's really hard to make a bunk bed.
Yeah.
Have you ever
Well,
like try to make the bed?
Try it on a train.
Oh.
Bunk bed on a train, but they're less costly, so, but individuals get to weigh that, these folks don't get to weigh whether it's not a choice. Okay,
Okay, what else? We pretty much wanna go down to section 3, check the money out. It sounds like, the big rub is gonna be the lines 24, where you're $500,000 under. Other than that, it sounds like, some of the other decisions that are ours to make, but anything else that anybody wants to add?
As long as finance is happy, I'm happy.
Finance happy, everybody happy
You always wanna keep
here?
the finance.
Everybody
very
good?
happy.
Anybody? Okay, ready? All good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for coming in.
Thank you.
Apologize for running late today, but we just, we're.
I feel like you were right on time.
So, yeah.
you're here.
That's
Yes.
Yeah.